Welcome to the Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session, the fourth week with the title of the World Heritage at 50th Forum. The session title is Recommendation for Heritage Site Listing Process, the Role of Civil Society. I would like to welcome our panelists who are really interesting people who are going to give us lots of important ideas and thoughts about the role of civil society and in the process of listing of heritage site listing. We will start with thanking Our World Heritage for this debate of July. And I would like to thank FLACAM also for all this cooperation and technical backup and support. And thanks all the panelists for their participation. What is listing? Everybody, do you see my screen?
We do. Are you able to put it in full screen mode, Luna?
I will. Okay. Okay, so the first idea for having a list for the World Heritage Sites started with relocating the Abu Simbel temples, which were in danger of being destroyed by the construction of a dam. So the temples were relocated to higher ground after a worldwide campaign launched by UNESCO aiming to save the temples. The seed notion of creating a list of similar important planetary treasures was planted at this time. When and where? A proposal to conserve cultural and natural heritage was made in 1965 during US conference called for a World Heritage Trust to preserve the world's superb natural and scenic areas and historic sites for the present and the future of the entire world citizenry. In 1968, the International Union for Conservation of Nature made similar proposals. Both proposals were presented in 1972 to the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm and were combined into one text that was accepted by all parties. The Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage was adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO on 16th of November 1972. The Convention came into force on 17 December 1975. How does the process work? Only countries that have signed the World Heritage Convention pledging to protect their natural and cultural heritage can submit nomination proposals for properties on their territories to be considered for inclusion in UNESCO's World Heritage List. The selection process essentially comprises 5 steps. Here is how they are described by the ICOMOS the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS. First, we have the tentative list. The country must make an inventory of its important natural and cultural heritage sites located within its boundaries. This inventory is known as the tentative list and provides a forecast of the properties that the state party may submit for inscription in the next 5 to 10 years and which may be updated at any time. Yes?
Sorry, Luna, to interrupt. The PowerPoint disappeared from the screen.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You're back on, yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So first the country needs to present a tentative list that lists all the site that he wanted to make as on the World Heritage List. Then we have the nomination file that describe all the criteria that need that said that this is an important site, cultural or natural, or both of them. Then we have it is given to the advisory bodies to be reviewed. Then the World Heritage Committee will take a look at it and make it one of the sites that is made. Of course, there's lots of criteria. There's 10 points of criteria for selection, and this has been changed during the years. Why listing is important? Once a country signs the World Heritage Convention and has sites inscribed on the World Heritage List, the resulting prestige often helps raise awareness among citizens and government for heritage preservation. Greater awareness leads to a general rise in the level of the protection and conservation given to heritage properties. A country may also receive financial assistance and expert advice for the World Heritage Committee to support activities for the presentation of its sites. The international assistance under the World Heritage Convention is a financial assistance granted to the state parties to the World Heritage Convention in order to help them protect the cultural or natural heritage sites inscribed on the World Heritage List or on the list of World Heritage in danger. So how can civil society participate on the listing process? As we saw that most of these steps and processes are done by the country and by the governmental bodies. So how can civil society participate in the process, in this listing process, and what benefits can get? I would like to introduce my colleague, the organizer of this session, and she will be a co-moderator, Mrs. Deborah Barros. She's an architect with experience working on the conservation of historic buildings in the US, the UK, and Brazil. She holds a master's degree in historic preservation from Columbia University in 2005, a certificate in conservation of archaeological sites from Università degli Studi di Firenze 2011, and a B.Arch from the University of Brasilia, Brazil 1999. She is a visiting assistant professor at Pratt Institute's Historic Preservation Program and associate at PDW Architect in New York, where she manages complex adaptive reuse and building conservation projects in listed landmark properties and culturally relevant urban settings. Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Luna. I have the privilege, the honor, and the joy to work with Mrs. Luna Rajab, a Syrian architect, advocate, and expert on cultural heritage. She holds a bachelor's degree in architecture engineering from Damascus University from 1993 and a specialization from École de Chaillot program at the Lebanese University in 2000. She's currently a partner and executive manager of ACE, her own architecture and engineering firm founded by her own father in 1969. She has led, coordinated, and executed numerous architectural and cultural heritage works for private and public sectors for UNESCO, UN, ESCWA, GIZ, DGAM, ADA, MWNF, IUAV, IFPO, and others. She's a member of ICOMOS. It is a joy to be here, not only with Luna, but also with all our panelists who so kindly are sharing their time and expertise with us today. And I extend my gratitude and acknowledgement to all the parties that she mentioned at the beginning of the session. So without further ado, we will start introducing our speakers. The first person speaking today is Mrs. Alessandra Cummins. She's an authority on Caribbean heritage, museum development, art. She's also the director of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. She has been a lecturer in museum and heritage studies and art history with the University of the West Indies for more than 15 years. She has served as the chairperson of the Barbados National Commission for UNESCO since 1999 and has represented Barbados as a member of the Executive Board of UNESCO. In 2005, she was awarded Barbados Gold Crown of Merit. Regionally, Mrs. Cummins was instrumental in the establishment of the Museums Association of the Caribbean and served as president of the International Association for Caribbean Archaeology. She has served as chairperson of the advisory committee and was president of the International Council of Museums. Please welcome Mrs. Alessandra Cummins.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Deborah. Let me go right ahead and share. Can I ask for my presentation? Right. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening to me this morning. So for consideration of how to improve the role of civil society in enhancing their participation in World Heritage listing processes, I've been guided in my thoughts on this by 4 key statements, which I will now share with you. Firstly, the source. Robert Macfarlane's statement from his Always a Journey on Foot reminds us that concepts of heritage or landscapes are born first in the thoughts or minds of individuals or communities, and their values are expressed first within or among members of civil society who develop indigenous or localized processes to acknowledge their importance. So here is the source of World Heritage. Next slide, please. And then let's look secondly at processes. Silencing the Past by Michel Rolfe-Trio very clearly and powerfully expresses the deliberateness with which the heritage was silenced through a process of curating or managing of the sources through a selection process where civil society is normally excluded. These processes include the making of sources, the making of archives, the making of narratives, and the making of history. And this moment of the making of history and the narrative, I should say, recognizably creates gaps. These gaps need to be made transparent, and then there needs to be a participatory process, which means direct engagement and involvement of community participants in the tentative listing process of World Heritage. Their acceptance, approval, authorization, if you will, is critical in order that the tentative list of heritage identified becomes a kind of co-curating process. Next slide, please. Thirdly, I wanted to talk about the language which is completely embedded in the processes that World Heritage endeavors to deal with and needs to be taken account of. But I wanted to look at this statement by Miranda Fricker about powerlessness and social interpretation. And when it comes to the articulation of meaning and value of the heritage within both the tentative listing and the nomination process, and I would say the evaluation of that nomination, consultation with the communities and civil society is critical and needs to be taken into account at this point in time. We do need to understand how members can be disconnected through this kind of epistemic injustices, which are still embedded in the World Heritage languages and which tend to exclude and marginalize groups and communities and to remove them from the reflective communication of the heritage and its interpretation. And the writing of the dossier becomes a rather distorted process if we don't understand the ways in which this OUV of the site is represented to different communities and how it is that communicated back to civil society whose identity it claims to represent. So here again, Miranda Fricker makes clear that to ensure that civil societies are not disempowered, then we need to understand the kind of hegemonic epistemologies that are utilized in the framing of the heritage within these processes. Next slide, please. And then fourthly, a kind of foundational text, which I think we need to remind ourselves of, that there is at the heart of the World Heritage Listing, being a part of the UN system, that it is part of a UN human rights agenda, and thus is or should be a rights-based approach, which ensures that, and I quote, everyone has the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, and this includes the right of access to and participation in and enjoyment of the culture. It also means the rights of individuals and communities to, and I quote, know, understand, visit, make use of, maintain and exchange, and develop cultural heritage and cultural expressions. So what this means is that it's critically important to embed civil society at the core of these processes. I think it's very important further to understand that we have to remember that community was only added as the fifth C of the World Heritage Strategic Objectives at the 2011 World Heritage Committee in New Zealand. Credibility, conservation, capacity building, and communication are all hugely important objectives. However, I think it's a critically important point to remember that community and civil society, if you will, should not remain an afterthought in the World Heritage listing processes, but rather be placed at the core of our convention. And finally, some thoughts as to how that might happen. Next slide, please, and the last slide. The last slide, please. So the key considerations for the role of civil society: understanding the world beyond colonialized stereotypes and westernized tropes that are embedded in the language and indeed the processes; understanding how culture and heritage has passed down and spread across the world. So we need to take into account migration and the travel of ideas and concepts, must include people within the diaspora. Multivocality is a critical point when including the voices of the global South, wherever they're represented. And there needs to be understanding that shared heritage means co-curation of content and interpretation and the creation of opportunities for mutual learning and understanding. And finally, the application of constructivist learning modules, which make room and hold space for the incorporation of traditional or inherited ways of learning and meaning making, which may not fit into the authorized heritage discourse, need to be taken on board and embedded in World Heritage listing processes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alessandra, so much for your thoughtful presentation. We will keep the program moving just so we can hear all different perspectives. Our next panelist is Dr. Hussam Mahdi, an Egyptian and British conservation architect. He's an independent consultant and researcher on the conservation of built heritage based in Oxford, the UK. He received his PhD from Glasgow University, his master's from Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation of the Catholic Universiteit in Leuven, and his Bachelor's of Science from Ain Shams University. Apologies for the Ain. He's a member of the Scientific Committee of Vernacular Architecture, CIAV. Mr. Mahdi's professional and academic work focuses on the Islamic views on cultural heritage preservation, the conservation of vernacular built heritage, and the protection of built heritage in the Arab region. He has a lifetime commitment to contributing to the establishment of a culture-specific approach, philosophy, and practice of conservation for cultural heritage in the Arab region. We all would like to welcome Dr. Mahdi to our panel. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It's my pleasure to talk to you today. My contribution to the debate would be with the title, The Absence of Informal Sector. And I would like to invite you to take a step back and reflect on the big picture before getting into the nitty-gritty of nomination process. Next slide, please. The premise, my premise is that the World Heritage List is an elitist concept. It is a product of modern Western worldview. A civil society that has a role or a say in decisions on national level is a Western phenomenon. In many countries outside the West, there is nothing such as the role of the civil society in the nomination process or indeed in any other governmental process. Next slide, please. World Heritage, the whole system, its philosophy, convention, operational guidelines, and the procedures are initiated, developed, and controlled by Westerners or Western-educated persons. In Western or Westernized cultures, it makes total sense to have beauty contests, Guinness World Records, and other eyebrow-raising lists and catalogs. However, in much more sophisticated and age-old civilizations and cultures, they make no sense. Beauty contests are insults to women. Guinness World Record is a silly trivia. So apart from income from tourism and political prestige for governments, how does World Heritage List matter to local communities in those countries outside the West? Next slide, please. For example, there are no agreed Arabic words for the following concepts that are totally important, crucial actually for the World Heritage process. Concepts such as integrity, attributes, vernacular, landscape, and of course, every term that includes landscape, such as cultural landscape, historic urban landscape. How to engage local communities in a process that does not speak their language. Next slide, please. Civil society. Maybe we should talk more about the formal-informal power dynamics. In post-colonial or neo-colonial regimes, we may talk of formal-informal rather than governmental, non-governmental sectors and activities divide. Next slide, please. I would give you an example from Egypt, the historic Cairo World Heritage Site. Here we can see the image of Ibn Tulun Mosque, which is a huge mosque built to accommodate for the prayers of the whole city at the time, and we see it empty, and there are maybe 3-4 persons praying inside, and it is an empty shell because anyone from the local community who wishes to pray in the mosque would have to produce an ID, would have to be body searched, and would have to be often, and in many cases, harassed by the tourism police or antiquities police, while a busload of tourists will happily be ushered in the mosque with big smiles by the same police personnel. Next slide, please. The two mosques of Sultan Hassan and the Rifai in Cairo are surrounded by a fence, and if you are not, if it's not a prayer time, then you need to ask for a ticket, to pay for a ticket. If you need to prove that you are a Muslim to get in, and it's no wonder that the local community prays in ad hoc arrangements of mosques, or in the streets, or in other mosques that are of no historic value. Next slide, please. So what is conserved? Is it the stones or the prayers? Well, you know, I would like to remind you of the issue of Hagia Sophia. When the building was reverted to the function as a mosque, the whole World Heritage professionals were really alarmed and concerned, while it was okay that it is an empty shell visited as a sort of museum. I also would like to remind you with Al-Aqsa Mosque, when it was attacked by Israeli armed forces and police, and prayers were harassed, were arrested, were wounded with bullets and grenades fired. No serious concern was raised by the World Heritage community because the stones were intact. It was only the prayers that were really interrupted. Next slide, please. So, takeaway message. We should always keep the big picture in mind. It is great to do our best to improve the nomination process. However, we should not forget that we are patching and tweaking a culture-specific Western system with the hope that it will work universally. The role of civil society in many countries is unfortunately a lip service, some photos with the locals, and tick a box on the nomination dossier checklist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hossam, for going to the heart of matters and questioning even the title of the session. We love it. We'll get more into it, but moving on to our next panelist, we have Mr. Dennis Rodwell, a consultant architect, planner, and independent researcher based in Scotland, UK. He works internationally in the field of cultural heritage and sustainable urban development, focused on the promotion and achievement of best practice in the management of the broadly defined historic environment. Previously principal in private architectural practice, Mr. Rodwell has also served in local government posts as architect, conservation officer, urban designer, principal planner, and project manager. He writes and publishes widely on the theme of conservation and sustainability in historic cities. Mr. Rodwell, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Apologies for my alarm. Please take it over from here. Thank you so much.
Are you going to show it, or do you want me to share the screen?
I think Luna has the control.
You do it. Well done. Well done. I'd like, first of all, to thank you all for inviting me. And I hope that our contributions, which have been kind of coordinated beforehand, fit together between the several of us on the panel here. I'm going to focus on urban heritage. Next slide, please. And I'm going to do so in the form of 5 questions in order to trigger some discussion. What is urban heritage? I'm continually asked this, and I'm surprised at the questions that come to me, but they need to be answered. Basically, my premise is to establish whether urban heritage is inclusive or exclusionist. The World Heritage Convention has 3 categories or categories for cultural heritage, and urban heritage comes under the category of groups of buildings, which immediately gives us a problem. It's tangible cultural heritage. That is urban heritage. The operational guidelines are not very helpful. The people are mostly confined to, they are not embedded in the process. Humans are not embedded in the process of urban heritage. Communities likewise. Habitat only occurs in the category of natural heritage. Authenticity is ambiguous. Paragraph 82 lists the attributes that come from the Nara Declaration, but this is contradicted in a strong sense by Appendix 3, paragraph 14.2. Historic towns which are still inhabited, a situation that renders the authenticity more difficult and any conservation policy more problematical. This immediately puts us back to the groups of buildings. The Historic Urban Landscape recommendation of 2011, we're now 10 years later, does not feature even in the bibliography of the latest edition of the operational guidelines. And integrity, well, I don't know what it means in relation to urban heritage. Next slide, please. That was my first question. And the second question is whose heritage? The Old and New Towns of Edinburgh World Heritage Site. This is my, let's say, city for a long time, since 1969, although I actually live outside now. The old town on the left and the new town on the right. Next slide, please. This was a top-down inscription process. There was no community involvement. The strapline of Edinburgh World Heritage Trust is "We connect people to their heritage." I've discussed this with them several times and I have not had a satisfactory answer, because whose heritage are they talking about? They have an outreach team and 20,000 residents are in the World Heritage Site. The population of the city is 500,000. It is not homogeneous population. Outreach means Edinburgh World Heritage Trust going to Port of Leith, the coastal resort of Portobello, and inland post-war communities to tell them what their heritage is based on the inscription on the World Heritage List. There are multiple heritage, multiple communities. Does Edinburgh only have one heritage, official, exclusive? Does everybody have to count out of that? Next slide, please. What happens with contested, unrecognized heritage? The historic inner city of Paramaribo World Heritage Site, Suriname, on the north coast of South America. Next slide, please. There is a fundamental challenge with Paramaribo. Again, a top-down inscription process, no community involvement. It was inscribed on the list in 2002. Suriname became independent in 1975. The inscription is based on the Dutch colonial Christian heritage. There's no Dutch people in Suriname today, and there's a complex mix of ethnic, religious, social, and cultural groups within the communities of Paramaribo. The description on the UNESCO site ignores, for example, the main synagogue and the assemblage of modernist buildings from the 50s and 60s. and there is an automatic shortfall of support for the heritage of the country's colonial past in political and governmental circles, filtering through to omissions in heritage education, professional and craft skills training, interpretation materials for visitors, all underscored by lack of community support. Now, I should explain that Suriname has a population which is slightly larger than Edinburgh. And when I, okay, next one, please. Yes. Then we go to Venice. Whose city is it? Next slide, please. In the early 1970s, the population of 130,000 people represented a balance between the number of households and the number of dwellings in the city. Today, there are less than 60,000 residents, mostly in peripheral areas of the city. 22+ million visitors a year have assumed precedence. Media attention is focused on the cruise ships, the most visible sign of excess tourism. The resident population drop by more than half in half a century attracts scant media attention and none from the World Heritage Center. Near tourist monoculture, Venetians have become foreigners in their own city. The impact of the COVID pandemic highlights the fact that Venice is fundamentally unsustainable as a tourist monoculture. Next slide, please. And next question. Vibrant, inhabited city. Will heritage kill it? The historic city of Ahmedabad in India was put on the World Heritage List just a few years ago. These slides are taken by a colleague of mine to assist with an article I wrote a year or two ago, highlight the fact that the tangible, the intangible, the natural and the cultural are all mixed up, which is exactly what an inhabited World Heritage City is. It's human habitat. But will heritagization kill this? Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Done.
Thank you, Mr. Rodwell, for raising excellent points. We can start identify some threads. The issue of language is quite clear. Mr. Mahdi touched upon it. You're highlighting the word heritage. In your writings, you talk about it and the importance of really having the right language. Mrs. Cummins also mentioned the importance of language. We will continue identifying emerging threads and topics here by presenting our next panelist, Miss Evren Ulusam. She's a PhD candidate, urban planner, and senior practitioner in the field of heritage management and World Heritage Convention. Having worked as a state official between 2004 and 2020, she has been involved in the preparation of numerous nomination files, state of conservation reports, as well as the coordination of the implementation of the convention on behalf of the State Party of Turkey. Her academic interest includes the research and publishing on heritage governance, participatory conservation and management, heritage planning techniques and mechanisms. Mrs. Ulusam now provides consultancy and service to local governments, NGOs, and companies. Please welcome Ms. Evren Ulusam.
Good afternoon from Turkey to all. I salute all the panelists and the followers who are today with us. And let me firstly start again as well by thanking the OWH team for the kind invitation to the event. It's really a great pleasure for me to be a part of this plenary session indeed. It's a big topic to discuss here, surely. It's not possible, of course, to touch upon each and every aspect of this issue in a couple of hours, but we will try to our best as much as possible. Let me say a few words about, maybe it will be a repetition, but it's important to note the importance of the civil society and their relations with heritage places. I'm sure none of us here, including the attendees and followers and the people working or interested in the World Heritage Convention, would deny the fact that preserving World Heritage properties on behalf of humanity is a big task, is a big responsibility which requires combined and joint efforts of diverse actors. But so far, I think firstly that such inscriptions are for the firstly benefits of the locals, to make them enjoy the wealth generated on the sites. But we have so much focused on the structures and maybe disregarded or ignored the actors having a role in this relationship for long. But we all have experienced in our lives that politicians, and even institutions may change, but the communities as a product of social relations of diverse actors are continuous. And the heritage places have always been their venue of past and possibly future interactions. So while being so much at the very center of this relation and being the group who are most affected by the decisions taken, they are the least ones, they are the group who are least consulted and least involved in the participation processes. The state, instead, on behalf of the community, acts as the main authority and responsible structure regulating the relationship between the community and the heritage places. So I think the focus is slightly moving to discussing the actors taking role in this relationship, but it's really important to note that the evidences we have witnessed so far have already proven the fact that this authority gap, let me say, is not fair and is not working on the ground. So before deepening my views, my thoughts on this issue, maybe it's better for me to draw a picture of Turkish experience in terms of community involvement in the nomination processes. Maybe it will not be an exact picture, maybe a sketch, but it's important to start from here. Next slide, please. Following the debates and discussions starting in the heritage field, starting from 1980s, our national legislation and normative rules in heritage conservation has improved so much. And as of 2004, the notion, and thanks to the amendments made to the operational guidelines of the convention, the notion of participation in heritage management has been legally introduced into the practice. So since then, we have been experiencing some level of collaborations among partners in the policymaking, implementation, and monitoring of World Heritage properties. This happens, however, through the management planning process, especially for the properties nominated to the World Heritage. For the others, still the bureaucratic, the hierarchical, the development-oriented, mostly development plan schemes is dominating the practice still. So we experienced some cases, maybe nearly 20 until now, but it's not possible for me, of course, to analyze the success of Turkey in participatory management in the field of World Heritage sites convention. But let me frankly state that if today we have some kind of legal mechanisms for participation in heritage conservation and management, this is precisely thanks to the World Heritage Convention. I shared some pictures from our experiences in Turkey. On the left, you see a picture from Aphrodisias management planning case. You see the planning team having a meeting with the locals. It was actually one of the early examples and one of the rare ones still. But we have already still some drawbacks while organizing such meetings. As you can see, the majority of the participants are still men. So, but it was, as I said, one of the rare examples in this regard. On the right, however, we had a meeting, we organized a meeting during the Arsantepe management planning process. That was the one and only meeting that we could organize due to time limits. So the majority of the participants were legal and formal partners, and there were some few from the non-governmental organizations, but they were neither active in the consultation discussions nor continued their support afterwards. Next slide, please. We have some kind of participatory mechanisms, but there is always a however. These participatory systems are limited mainly, still remains limited to the mainly formal and legal bodies, as I said before. And the wide and the depth of participatory system can vary from case to case, depending upon the capacities and preferences of the teams and authorities as well. And also the fact that the participation needs allocation of sufficient time and money for organizing such events somehow becomes more determinant in decision-making towards participatory systems. So, on the other hand, during the World Heritage nominations, the task is at the hands of a group of experts in the related institutions, let me say. Sometimes consultations, external consultations with the researchers, practitioners, or academicians can be obtained, can be applied, but no direct involvement of non-expert, non-technical stakeholders is possible. Maybe, at least it has been the case until now in Turkey. Next slide, please. So this has been the case in Turkey. I will try to filter some few key issues out of my experience in the field of World Heritage nominations. One is related, next slide, please. The first one is related about the legalities. As Dear Hussam explained previously, that in authoritarian governments, unless there is a direct legally binding provisions exist in the legislation, some authorities having the power in their hands, holding powers, can refrain themselves, allowing civil society actors or representatives to involve into the decision-making process. Or at the best, this decision is up to the teams or institutions' initiatives. But what the theory says, if heritage governance, not yet please, if heritage governance is to be ensured, you have to allocate some power of the state, some responsibility of the state to non-state actors. And for an ideal and operational heritage governance systems with non-state actors like civil society, this kind of legal binding mechanisms are needed. So the state parties, I think, needed to cooperate, needed to be urged to cooperate with diverse non-governmental organizations in this field. So maybe convention should have a role in that, requesting the state parties to transfer some of their rights, some of their authorities with the efficient amount of budget and legally secured budgets to local management units. Therefore, I believe that state rescaling is key to ensure the continuous involvement of civil society representatives into the decision-making. And I also believe that this should be more central to the outstanding universal value prior to any inscription, rather than being a managerial issue, just necessitating a referral to be further in the future. Next, please. The other issue I want to highlight is about the power relations. Next, yes, thank you. We always tend to assume and imagine that non-governmental organizations are representing a diversity of civil society members or civil society groups within the community, and they are mostly the homogeneous entities. But what the scholars have already pointed out until today, that experts working or analyzing participatory mechanisms has to be aware and do not undermine the power relations within and among the non-governmental organizations as well. So each and every non-governmental organization is acting for certain purposes, targeting certain purposes, goals, and their diversified expectations, interests, may conflict to each other and may challenge the nominations. And this leads us to the third issue, I think. Next, please. The role of nomination experts, nomination teams in resolving the conflicts during the nomination processes. So we know that nomination needs structuring a comprehensive technical and sometimes academic files in a certain format in which statements of outstanding universal values are at the very heart, at the very core. So it might be a situation in general that we always experience in Turkey. Some value prioritizations from some actors may not well fit into or may not well suited to this format. Or sometimes different views can conflict to each other. Or sometimes expectations from the listing can be challenging in itself to heritage places in terms of, for example, commodification or attribution loss or authenticity loss. In such circumstances, the nomination experts, the teams handling this process, will have to firstly inform the non-expert participants properly, then will mediate the discussions during the process, and will try to reach some consensus about World Heritage exceptionalities and expectations. So I think that World Heritage has its own politics, and World Heritage experts preparing the nomination files and managing this process has to be well equipped and well informed prior to the process. So the next one is about the technicalities in participation management. We are sure and we all agree that community involvement in heritage conservation and management, as well as the nomination processes, is a heritage right. We all agree that, but pragmatism is also essential to proper management of nominations. So at this stage, talking about technicalities is having a central role in decision-making towards participation management. The participation in this sense should be managed in a reasonable and timely manner. But we should also able to explain ourselves to our partners rationally why we involved some actors into the process, why we left the others outside. I think participation, drafting a participation strategy at the very initial stage can help the experts having a role in this process can be a good solution to manage these technicalities. And also such responsibilities like transparency and rationality, accountability in decision-making during the participation management necessitates working together with different expertises like communication experts, sociologists, anthropologists, etc. Last but not least, my remark will be about the limits. In my experience, I realized that every political, technical, or practical debates over participation are turning around the same question, simple question. As to whom to involve, at which stage, to what extent? What defines those limits? And is it a technical or political problem? So dealing with such questions, maybe the composition of participatory groups may vary among cases again, but policies should be certain and explicit if we would like to build up an adaptable, sustainable, and operational heritage management system. To sum up my views on this subject, I can say that I think sustainable development can be ensured through development of policies and their implementation at the local level. And the community's involvement and continuous involvement and engagement commitments is essential for this. I will conclude by highlighting 3 key steps maybe to achieve more inclusive nomination files, nomination processes, and afterwards processes. The first would be to empower local communities into decision-making, into management, and securing, guaranteed their rights by legal provisions. This is the first important step, I think. The second one would be building up a an active citizenship within the community through educational programs at all levels. I know it's very idealistic, but it's important to be ideal. Let's target the ideal to achieve the best, I think. And the final one, of course, adoption of a bottom-up approach in planning and the policymaking process. But another difficult question emerges here as to whom would deserve, request, and who would provide these. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, dear Evrim. I think your presentation had highlighted an important question, that is, who are civil society, and our civil society is the local community, and what kind of variety we can have in the process if we're talking about civil society and their involvement in the process, and how they can be part of the process of listing the World Heritage List. Deborah, would you like to present our final speaker? Although I think she couldn't join us until now.
Is she on?
No, she's not. But anyway, you can just introduce her, and we can open the round table.
Okay. So our fifth panelist is Mrs. Lina Abu Salim, a practicing architect in urban regeneration and adaptive use, who worked on the conservation, interpretation, and management of the Assault Old City, and was part of the joint technical team working on the nomination file for its inscription in the World Heritage List. She is the coordinator for the project Her for Dev, an EU-funded project called Heritage for Development, investing in people for the rehabilitation and management of the historic city centers with a number of partners. Her experience includes work with volunteers and coordination of the Cultural Heritage Tourism and Urban Development Project, among others. She is a member of ICOMOS Jordan, Secretary General, board member, and member of the Jordanian Engineers Association, and she'll be hopefully joining us later today. I think now we move on to our questions in our panel. Thank you all panelists for sharing your thoughts and the key issues that help us to warm up for this discussion.
We will move up to our round table with our expert, and in the matter of fact, although we have so many questions that we had shared with you previously, but I think after listening to all these presentations, and I think first we need all of us to specify a little bit what we mean exactly by civil society, because civil society is a very wide word that have a range of participants in it. We are OWH, are civil society. ICOMOS is a civil society because it's an NGO. We are not yet, but we will be. We are an initiative, and we are a civil movement. All the NGOs that take care of cultural heritage around the world is civil society. But do we mean also the local community, the people and the indigenous people who live within these cultural and natural sites? Are these the ones that we want to discuss how they can be more empowered and involved in our discussion? I'm going to give the floor to our expert to talk about this issue before we move to our questions. And kindly, I would like to remind all the participants and the attendees that we are open to questions and answers. Kindly put your question on the Q&A chat box so we can share it with our panelists. Thank you. So I would like to invite first maybe Alessandra to tell us what's in her mind about.
Okay. But I think it's very clear from all of the speakers how limiting the involvement and engagement of communities and civil society is in terms of the listing processes of World Heritage. Now, we tend to be more receptive about the management processes. There's a special expectation that the sorry, I see my camera still off. There's expectation that civil society, who's been called upon to assist in the management of the site, because the site manager can't do it on its own, that's already part of the engagement. What we haven't understood is that the investment in the tentative listing process and in the nomination process is critical, is equally critical, because if we want to ensure engagement of civil society in the management process, then they need to be part of the decision making that decides what goes on the tentative list and what ultimately is being nominated. Now, I think that is the critical point that we are trying to discuss here. How can we ensure the engagement, participation, and even ownership of those listing processes by the society which it claims to represent? So that's my point.
Okay. Anybody else who would like to answer? Dennis, Hussam, Evrim? Yes.
May I?
Yes, please.
Right. To me, I think we should be really talking about the local community, because in many cases, when we are talking about civil society, such as NGOs and other bodies, it's basically the same persons who are in the government who change hats, and instead of being the governmental representative of such and such, will become the ICOMOS member of such and such. And more or less, we are still talking about the professionals and the experts who are in many cases not really fully understanding and fully appreciating the local community and its interests and its needs and its culture and its, the way they see the heritage. And as I mentioned in my intervention, I think in many countries, we are talking, if we want a sector to represent that local community, then we are talking about the informal sector. We are not talking about civil society per se, because usually in a totalitarian government, they usually have nice puppet civil society organizations that are more or less just a facade for what the government wants to say, but in a nice way that is acceptable by UNESCO and advisory bodies. So I think the essence is the local community, regardless of what we call it and in what way we address it. But unless we manage to get the voices and the interests of the local community as part, essential part of the nomination process, then all is basically ticking a box, and it's not really, there's no civil society really in that process. Thank you.
So we are focusing now, we're talking about the local community, that is the who live, or yes, I will do that, who live inside these cultural heritage sites and in these natural heritage sites. So how do you think that we can, I will move to Dennis, then how we can involve them, because sometimes they're not aware about what we are talking about. They're not aware about what they can do and how they can participate, and what are the benefits that they can gain from nominating the site a World Heritage Site from first point of view, or is it going to be, sorry for the word, a curse for them that their city, for example, is nominated on the World Heritage Site and they cannot really move as free as they want in this city. Yes, Dennis, please.
Well, I really wanted briefly to fully agree with Hossam and to express my view that there are no limits to civil society. It is not some kind of little box in the world. It is everybody. And I also have some discussions with people about the concept of indigenous communities, which is also a kind of something apart. But every city has an indigenous urban community, sometimes through multiple generations. They are not classified as indigenous, and they are not classified as part of NGOs and all the rest of it, so they are actually cast aside. I mean, I've worked in cities where, in fact, the existing multi-generational population community is regarded as somehow alien to the World Heritage notion, that they are not suitable people to be living in a World Heritage city. This has been expressed to me explicitly by certain governmental officials. So I don't know how to do it, but and I have been involved in this question of communicating with local communities. One of the first things one has to do is to learn that the language used by experts and professionals and academics does not communicate well. Even the word heritage does not communicate well. It's immediately commodified. It's a kind of, I can go out and buy heritage potatoes, heritage tomatoes. They just happen to be more expensive. So the language of communication has to be the language of the community, not the top-down language of academics and academia and professionals. There's a huge learning curve to be acquired here. I have touched upon it in some writings, but the first starting point is that civil society is everybody, and there are no limits. And indigenous communities are not simply ones that are operating in, I don't know, north of Canada, in the center of Australia or somewhere else. Indigenous communities are communities that are established over multi-generations in cities, anywhere. So we have a huge path to trek to get this to work. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to highlight a question by this is Patricia O'Donnell. She's one of the founder of our OWH, our World Heritage Sustainability. And by the way, Ege told me that OWH became an NGO, an official NGO in Netherlands, registered in Netherlands. So this is good news. The notion of a non-homogeneous civil society is fundamental. We have heard the comment from people in the community that continual calls for participation can cause fatigue, with the expectation to contribute freely to a long-term process. Do you have examples or best practices for ongoing engagement of citizens? Who would like I think Evrim, can you answer this? Thank you.
Sure, but I want to say a few words about the first two questions maybe. Okay. What I understand from the local community is the people who are producing values and narratives in the heritage places, in the cities, in the space. So they might be ancestor from the past, or they might be living here, or future generations as well, our local communities to take into considerations as partners. But I believe that in order to manage the processes, decision-making processes, we have to be really pragmatic, and we have to limit ourselves upon certain rationalities to decide upon our partners, I think. In Turkey, that's the ideal one, to include all the citizens, all the residents in an area into the decision-making. But in Turkish context, especially, in Turkish realities, I can say that the civil society, which is not organized in any one group or entity, cannot voice their cannot make their voice very strong, demand something very strongly from the state. They have to come together. They want to be a powerful NGO within within the community as well as within the nationwide. So after that, you have the right something to obtain from the state. So that's why my understanding is surely local community refers in my mind to heritage users, value producers, narrative producers. But in Turkish context, when we talk about civil society, we always refer to non-governmental organizations who are representing those civil society. And for the Patricia's question, in Turkish system, participation, as I explained, is working on the legal base. During, after, or pre-nomination stages, we structure a legal mechanism called site management system, composed of site manager, advisory board, and supervision and coordination board, which are responsible for analyzing and deciding upon the approval or implementation monitoring about the management plan only. This system works after the inscriptions. They come together yearly, maybe, or twice a year, but direct involvement, direct access of civil society to municipalities, to other organizations is very limited. Maybe city councils, city assemblies are having some role who are becoming more central in providing these relations between the community and the state, but they are also at a very primitive stage, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to move to our first question regarding for this session, this round table. The first question said, how participatory are World Heritage and tentative listing processes, particularly compared to World Heritage site management process? How participatory? Hossam, would you like to answer this question? Do you think that the listing, the process, the World Heritage and tentative listing processes are participatory?
As I expressed earlier, I don't believe so, at least in the Arab and Islamic cultural context. Mainly because the system of World Heritage, the concept of World Heritage is not really fitting to every cultural context. I mean, the fact, what does it mean really? And is this really, I mean, like when you list a building or a site, is it more important than ones that are not listed on the World Heritage list? Is it, you know, the fact that, I mean, like the value system and the way different communities see their heritage and appreciate it differ. And while UNESCO and the World Heritage system is trying to, I mean, like aims to actually to celebrate the diversity in the world and in cultures, what is actually doing is it's homogenizing it. It's actually, it's making, it's like I have a pizza in Italy, in Britain, because you know that it's adapted to the British taste. So it's not anymore Italian. So when the pyramids are now on the World Heritage list, it is with the camels and a few, you know, picturesque stuff that the tourists expect, and the whole. I mean, I think there is a major problem here that when you are saying when you say OUV, when you say outstanding universal value, and you have these criteria that are like iron shoes, you know, for you know, squeezing in some sort of value that could be understood in China, as well as in the States, as well as in South Africa. And then the local community in many cases doesn't understand that criterion, but actually it qualifies. And so I really think that when we are, the World Heritage System, now that is trying to be more democratic and more open and more available for non-experts and so on, is addressing these issues, but then it is highlighting its own deficiency, that it is an exclusive way of seeing heritage, and it's a way of really picking and choosing rather than accepting the context that actually heritage and culture are not really about a postcard or one site here and then the rest is it's out of the boundary, so it's out of the buffer zone also, so it doesn't matter. So I can go on forever, so I'll stop here.
I just would like to follow up on the answers and the commentary on discussion. It sounds like what you're talking about is the need to really accommodate living traditions, which was in Mr. Rodwell's presentation and talking about cities in many of his writings. But you talk about, Hossam, in your work as well, of accommodating expressions of being a citizen that should not be erased of the process. But then going back to the presentation of Mrs. Hussam, when she mentions that the strategy would be to create policies, to create legal instruments that could allow for that. But I think one of the questions that we have is also the issue of what you mentioned, the outstanding universal value and the potential conflict with the interests of local communities, right? Or of the people who created the heritage. In her presentation, Mrs. Hussam said that she thought that management should be more central to the OUV. And I want to make sure that I understood this, because I think there is also part of the discussion in which the OUV, or the focus on that, is bringing the external communities who understand the site as an image, as a concept, as a construct of their minds. And we're talking about image in the literal sense of going to a site, taking a picture and posting on Instagram right now, as opposed to the living traditions that created that site. So I just would like to, and I think that it would be fair to say that that's going to be, it's being exponentialized right now, right, with the dissemination of a culture of images. So I would just like to clarify that. Is OUV the focus, or we need to balance? It's extremely relevant, but we need to dial back all these interests to have to have equity. Are we talking about equity in values? I imagine. You have your hand up, Ephraim. Yes, go ahead.
Your microphone is off, Ephraim.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a very fruitful discussion, I think, to comment on, because this is very crucial in the afterwards processes, after the inscriptions especially. So because you are inscribed, your target to be inscribed, to be registered on the list, then committee allocates some time to monitor you out of over 1,000 properties. So national state officials, and together with the locals, together with the communities, are becoming on their own on the field, mostly. What I want to highlight after Deborah's contributions, that outstanding universal value inevitably highlighting some of exceptionalities for the inscriptions, and in our management plans on the way to the listing are also focusing on very much on the outstanding universal values, because some of the guidelines are allocating a huge space in the documents to focus on the outstanding universal values. But I believe that management plan is a general system in order taking into consideration as also non-exceptional values into considerations during the management. So if we produce a management plan taking into consideration such diversified narratives and values which are overlapping or conflicting or any kind of values, into consideration and put it on the nomination file to take into consideration during the nomination process. And if the committee respects our capacities, our traditions, national traditions and capacities as much as possible, then I believe that we can manage both the outstanding universal values as well as the non-universal, local, somehow conflicting values. The key issue, I think, here to involve all the conflicting parties into decision-making and to make a platform to negotiate. This is the most, I think, needed system in Turkey, because the state makes a decision, send it to the locals, and locals apply it on the level. But this should be reversed. This should be applied on the other way around. That's what I trying to underline during the management systems. We should take into consideration all values and capacities should be respected. National systems, traditions should be respected by the committee and ICOMOS as well. But outstanding universal value, once committee decides upon some statements about outstanding universal values, the management capacities should be more central, should be more respected by the committee itself. That's what I wanted to highlight in my presentation, actually. Thank you.
I think we have a question also from Subin Cho. She's talking about the processes she's been watching the 44 World Heritage Committee. And the question is, through what kind of processes or efforts do you think should be added or be made for a better involvement of local community or civil society? Since we are talking about how we can involve the civil society in these processes, as Evrim said, the management and how we can involve all parties in these processes. How do you think we can make this? What kind of I don't know processes, efforts can be done to this? Yes, Hussam, please.
I mean, like, not really. I'm not sure if I can answer fully, but I think I can give a starting point. First of all, the language. The language is, you know, all these charters and conventions were written in European languages. They were thought in European languages and discussed in European languages. So when you translate them, they sound awkward and sometimes ridiculous, because you know, every language has a mind. So we need to, although we are talking about world heritage, about universal value, we need to accept that within every cultural context, there is a need for domesticating, not just translating the whole concept, for the local community to really participate truly, not to tick a box because the law requires that ticking a box. That's one issue. The other issue that I would like to raise is the worldview. For example, the system, UNESCO, UN, it is a secular worldview. It is based on a secular worldview. Now, when you go to a traditional religious society, then they have a totally different worldview. And so it's not just the language. What you mean by sustainability in English, when you say it in Arabic, istidama, and you talk about it to a religious Muslim, actually for him, sustainability, it's from now until the hereafter. It's not the same concept that is understood universally. And in that way, there is a system like waqf system, the endowment system in the Arabic and Islamic cultures, where istidama, where sustainability means that actually a building or an institution would last sort of forever. So I'm talking here about a worldview that actually you are considering the hereafter when you're talking about sustainability. So the values and the worldview, unless you really respect them and appreciate them and use them in the discussion, in the negotiation, unless you do that, it is too superficial. And one final point, when you are talking about, you know, a negotiation, everyone was talking about negotiating. Now, when you are, it's like, for example, the Arabs and Israelis are negotiating all the time. But actually, this is, we know that it is going nowhere because one party is very strong and the other is not strong. So when two parties, one of them has the power, and actually is paying for the second party their salaries. And then this is not really negotiation. This is really informing, because how can you say no to the guy who is giving you your salary and who's going to promote you and who can imprison you also? I'm sorry that I keep in mind then you know, the so-called third world countries, because that's where I work and that's where all this, you know, nice system, when you see it on the ground, you know that it's really not working. And people keep, I mean, the experts keep blaming the local community. Oh, we need to raise awareness. We need to educate them. We need to. The local community is much more civilized than these experts. It's just that we are talking different languages. Thank you.
I think we're talking different languages, and I think as it was mentioned that money and time, as Evrim has mentioned in her presentation, are crucial to raise awareness among the local communities and to help them more to get involved into these discussions, and this is if they are interested, and so how we can make them more interested. Yaping is saying how to drive positive attitudinal change among local communities during the World Heritage process, especially to foster a multidimensional and inclusive value perception of local people. This seems to be a precondition for an active engagement of the civil society. So, who would like to help us in how we can drive a positive attitudinal change? Alessandra, would you? Your microphone is off.
Luna, would you mind repeating the question, because I don't think I captured everything when I was listening to you.
Okay, well, he's asking about how to drive positive attitudinal change among local communities during the World Heritage process, especially to foster a multidimensional and inclusive value perception of local people. Because this seems to be a precondition for an active engagement of the civil society. So what do you think?
Okay, I think that notwithstanding all of the tensions and fragilities that we've been discussing ahead, that we can't give up on our expectation, on our ambition, on our vision for the future. So some of the activities that we have engaged in Barbados that I think could be useful, including developing specific tours for the community, not for tourists, although some tourists may join, but for the community. We have found that firstly, we should have engaged society in a more cross-the-board fashion before the listing of historic Bridgetown and its garrison. So we have spent a lot of time after its inscription engaging with communities on a number of different levels so that there's greater understanding. Once we have set up a website, but you have to learn how to drive people to the website in order to learn more about the site. We have developed what we called World Heritage Learnings, which allowed community groups or corporate society or anybody who had old age pensions, anybody who wanted to understand or know more about what this site means and why it was listed and those sorts of things, could request the university and the museum to deliver a short 2-hour, 3-hour session to a group of their choice with no charge. And what we wanted to do was to make sure that communities had a chance to learn how they could get involved, how they could invest in their own knowledge and understanding. And so we were not requiring any academic level or anything like that. If you have an interest, you could call, you could book, and we would deliver this session. So that was one way. As I said, we also created tours around the various themes with groups of actors who could present elements of the heritage on different corners, street corners, where there were particular points of heritage to raise the profile of what that was. But what we were not doing was expecting people to read the information. What they did was they gained knowledge by the localized discourse from these actors, and the actors then interacted with them, and they gained a greater understanding about, okay, this represents this part of my heritage. Another activity that we undertook was, to run treasure hunts for young children so that they could learn a little bit more about world heritage if they took their camera or their phone, took photos of the heritage that had been mapped, and gave their own social media posting as to why this was important and what they learned from the exercise. So I would say that what we have engaged in, yes, we have had the lectures, yes, we have done publications on different aspects of the heritage in the last 10 years. But it is the point, what drives popular demand is when they can get involved, and when they then see the connection between themselves and this environment in which they are participating. So I'm not going to tell you that they're all feel-good stories, but I can tell you that some of these systems work. It's participatory, and it's knowledge building, and it's engaging because the community has chosen to be involved. Okay.
Thank you. This will lead us to answer. I don't think we did answer the question of dear Patricia. It's what example do you think that we have best practices for ongoing engagement for citizens? Maybe all of you can give me, for example, if they had a best practices, just the title or the site itself, so we can maybe dig in more later during our discussion. Yes, Dennis, please.
I've critiqued this line of discussion for a long time, and you provoke me to critique it now. To me, it is all top down. It is me, I know what your heritage is, come and listen to it and I will tell you about it. There is no interchange here. There is an expectation that heritage is your exclusive preserve. You're the person who knows about it. You're going to tell them what they are. You're not asking them what their heritage is. And this is a vital part of a discourse. And in fact, using the word heritage is a problem, because that immediately sets up barriers with many people. And I've been involved in exercises where you don't use these words. You find out what is important to them. What you ask them, what is important to them about their place. And they will tell you because my grandmother lives there, or they will tell you about the church tower or something, which is a landmark. But they will blank off as soon as you start using elitist words like heritage, because you're then stuck into the narrative of the authorized heritage discourse. So the notion of going around and selling, basically you're selling a product. If you're telling people about their heritage, you are selling a commodity. you are not entering a dialogue. And this is a fundamental part to me of the interchange. And also one of the difficulties that we have, which Hossam pointed out, is that as soon as you list something, everything else is not on the list. It's an exclusionist process. It's a process of putting things onto a list which excludes everything else. So in the United Kingdom, where Hossam and I both live, if a building is not listed, it can be demolished. If an area is not a conservation area, it can be knocked down. So this is the other side of the process of listing. And there are some countries where if it's not on the World Heritage List, it is disposable. So you have two sides of a coin here. You list something and you protect it, but everything on the other side of the coin can be thrown away. And we are not in the third quarter of the 20th century. We are rapidly approaching the second quarter of the 21st century. The agendas are totally different. We are talking about sustainability. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about the knowledge that the world's natural resources are diminishing and some of them are expiring. So the whole idea of talking about a narrative which dates, as the convention does, from the third quarter of the 20th century, as we advance to the second of the 21st, is up for question. It's a serious question because the whole rationale for it, when I was at university, I finished before heritage appeared on the scene. Basically, heritage, I was in inheritance. Inheritance did not have barriers between natural and cultural, tangible and intangible. Inheritance was everything. By 1972, the word heritage started to appear, and immediately it was a silo, and it's become more and more of a silo, partitioned into the different sectors: natural, cultural, tangible, intangible. And we have a major problem to address in the question of the build-up to the 50th anniversary of the convention, and that is what parts of the convention are still valid. Is this focus on listing valid? Should we not be looking at Article 5? Should we not be looking at the other article, which I think is 11? Should we not be looking at the recommendation for natural heritage, for national heritage? We have to start asking core questions rather than assuming that it's business as usual in a scene in the global agendas, which are totally different. When I was at university, the professor told us because at that time, 3% of the building stock was being demolished and therefore being rebuilt. We were told that in our professional lifetimes, we would rebuild Britain, all of it, in entirety, because that was the arithmetical logic of the equation. We're not there, we're here. And I'm concerned that we are not fully engaged with what time and era we're in. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodwell. These were excellent points. I mean, follow with the concepts that were discussed here of stepping back and even questioning the title of the session and really questioning the language and the framework and the concepts that we are just dragging from previous decades that needs to be rejuvenated. So I would like to bring up then another question, and then you're going to go back to the questions that are being posed by the audience. I think we are talking about asking communities what has meaning to them and what they want to have preserved, which is very important. But I wonder within that concept, since you're talking about the role of experts and them being actors of civil society, what would be the enhanced or relationship of advisory bodies' approaches and perceptions of significance with those of local communities? What is the role of advisory bodies? Do we have an enhanced role at this moment? You know, I think in our internal discussions, one item that was brought up by Dr. Mahdi was the economic factor, which we also should touch upon, right? heritage as an element that's commodified, and the fact that a lot of communities are struggling with basic issues like such as the hierarchy of needs of Maslow. So when you have a great part of the population, and I come from a third world, the so-called third world country, developing country from Brazil. So I've also seen firsthand that when people are trying to eat, people are trying to feed their families, you know, how education falls through. You know, it's a given. So within this context, what is really the role of advisory bodies and of the experts as civil society? Anyone?
No one really wants to touch that hot potato. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Absolutely right, Alessandra.
So let me start somewhere. We're talking about, again, I will put it in context with the presentation I did this morning. We're talking about power relations. We are talking about terminologies and epistemologies that were right and proper 50 years ago, but which now raise concerns, and that's a very mild term, when we start using terms like experts. Experts suggest that that grouping and that experts are included in the advisory bodies. It suggests that that group has greater authority over what is established as the heritage, as Dennis has pointed out, is very much part of the continuation of the authorized heritage discourse. So I think that as far as possible, we need to challenge that discourse, because really and truly, the experts about the heritage are those who live it every day. They work in it, they live in it. They're the experts. We need to create situations where dialogue is more and where learning is understood to come from the local community and is absorbed, thankfully, by the advisory bodies and indeed the state party in an exchange which is better articulated than it is now. At the moment, the choice can be made to either listen to and involve local communities and their expertise or not. And it should be less of a choice in that context if we are truly going to have a universal convention. At the moment, we have some engagements which are better than others, but it's by no means where it should be if we're really going to put the convention to work as it was supposed to. So I think that's where I'll leave it in my response.
Thank you so much. Luna, would you like to move to a question from the audience? We have, I'll just ask, we have a question from Mohammed Mekdad. Thanks to all very interesting presentations. When the whole process of inscribing is led by the state parties, which is represented by institutions of experts, and the decision about those listings is approved or disapproved by a body of experts from the international community, would it be an option to invite a representative of local communities to take part in the UNESCO discussion meetings about their own heritage rather than just involving them in a minimal participation process for preparing the nomination files? Would anybody like to tackle this one?
Just to clarify, Deborah, when we talk about the discussion processes, are they talking about at the moment of nomination, at the moment of review by the World Heritage Committee. I'm not quite clear where they're focusing that request.
I would think I would have to ask Mr. McDodd to clarify which particular moment, yes, which moment in time. It's one of the questions from our audience. So if he's able to clarify either on the chat or the questions.
He said the whole process.
The whole process. See it in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I can say a few words about it from Turkish experience. I've been following the nominations for more than maybe 16 years. And in the last years, especially during the site missions, the ICOMOS are questioning more and more the relations of local communities with the site. So they are asking, sometimes in closed meetings, sometimes together with us, whether their views are reflected into the documents or not. What are their expectations from this thing, etc. They take their notes to be reported to the ICOMOS and committee. It seems that the relation is becoming more central within the ICOMOS decision-making process, but we cannot, of course, understand the discussions behind or in the rooms afterwards. But I think the central authorities and sometimes local authorities approach to heritage sites are more crucial than the local communities and ICOMOS. So if some kind of mechanisms, some kind of participatory systems in the nomination processes, the issue is to be very careful about what kind of views we are dealing with. It might be just targeting the more tourism-oriented policies or to get more promotion, to get more awareness, etc. But if we involve more stakeholders requesting more appearance, more promotion in the field of, in the market of tourism, then we have to limit maybe sometimes to try to manage such kind of participations into the processes. So here, I think the ICOMOS should be more guiding on the technicalities of participatory processes. So maybe they should examine and question some details about mechanisms applied in the nomination processes. So what kind of meetings that we have, with which groups, and what questions we ask to them. They might be more relevant in the evaluations, I think, and committee sessions is not much suitable for, I think, for in-depth discussions in terms of technicalities. And only 2 minutes are allowed for the NGOs and observer state parties. But behind, there is a huge process taking approximately 2 years in the evaluation stages, and ICOMOS should provide some guidance, maybe, or experiences should be diverted to the backstage of the nominations to provide more involvement of participatory systems, I think. I'm not sure if I responded properly.
But if I might follow Evelyn a little bit to add to what she was saying. Chair, is that okay? Should I go ahead? I think that for the World Heritage Committee, and more importantly, in a sense, the advisory bodies, they are very pleased with themselves that that they did this gap analysis, although that was some 14 or 15 years ago, and share knowledge about the histories and the locations of interactions of cultures and civilizations, if you like, has been hugely increased since that time. So in a sense, the gap analysis is somewhat outdated and really can't be the most relied upon platform anymore. So it requires updating, and a gap analysis like that should not be left to chance. It really needs to be built into the process, where as a part of ongoing consultations, this gap analysis is developed, regularly updated, you know, every 5 or 10 years, so that we are certain that we are capturing greater knowledge. So that's the first part. The second part is everybody is more than pleased with themselves that they finally instituted what they call the upstream process, which should be enabling greater consultation with the, not just with the state party, but with the communities ahead of the evaluation, the formal evaluation, responding to desk reviews by the advisory bodies, but responding in a way that enables questions to be asked and discussions to go on before a formal and final evaluation is listed. Yes, this represents something of an improvement in the whole listing process and the whole consultative process. But as you know, determinations are made as to who and what they will consult with. So in that sense, the advisory body's hands may be tied without full cooperation from the state party. And as we've heard from Hussam and others, that doesn't always recognize the value and input of other communities. So I think that there are processes within this, within the listing timetable, if you like, which have been increased, which have added value to what is the formalized process in the organizational guidelines. But as everyone said, there's a huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. And a lot of it relies then on the state party to really engage with its community prior to going forward with nomination and even tentative listing. And I would suggest that we do need to look more at the even pre-tentative listing as a wider consultation that involves literally inventorying of anything that is of importance to the local community. It's on that basis then that one could start to develop a tentative list that might have some more meaning. And then from that, you go on to nominations. So these are procedural matters which could allow for greater engagement than they currently do. It is unfortunate, as Hussam has added, that these kinds of processes are not necessarily utilized everywhere. But I would argue then that there are processes within other communities that are based on traditional practice. Is there any way that we could learn more about those and include the fact that traditional practice, which allows for some form of consultation within the community and some sort of decision-making on a traditional basis, could be built in and appreciated and accepted as part of these preliminary rounds, which would then ensure, I think, greater support from the community. But one has to accept and adapt to these kinds of inclusions. I would point out that there are very few sites that currently have accepted. Dennis had spoken to it, but not fully, the role of the indigenous communities in making their own self-determination. And while that is being accepted more at the management planning process, we have not, we see only in very few sites where the traditional determinations of the community are accepted and are fully inserted into the nomination and the proposed management plan. And on that basis, I'll end my discussion there.
May I say something?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I just want, I mean, like, there is a kind of warning that I would like to raise, that in many countries that are living in a post-colonial period, the colonial legacy is so strongly still there. And unless it is directly addressed, rather than ignored and assuming that things are fine, actually there is a very serious problem. I give you an example. In Egypt, we have one of the earliest mechanisms and laws of protecting what we would call heritage now, but it's called antiquities. We have the law of antiquities. We have the Ministry of Antiquities, Tourism and Antiquities. Until now, it's called antiquities. And while the West moved on to things like, places of cultural significance and things like this, and then heritage, and actually heritage is going out of favor now, while we are in Egypt now talking about, no, it is not antiquities, it is heritage. By the time we adopt the concept of heritage and the laws and institutions, everything adapts to that, by then the West and the whole world will be moving on and into a more, advanced kind of concept. So I think one problem is that in countries where the colonial legacy is very strongly rooted, mainly by laws, by education systems, by institutional structures, and so on, while the World Heritage System is moving quite fast. As Dennis was saying, I mean, like now, when we talk about, concepts that were 30 years ago acceptable, now they are not acceptable because we have different priorities, we have different contexts, we are living in a different environment. So this kind of moving forward and the fluidity and the dynamics on the international level, that is not happening in many of the third world countries, because you actually you have this machine that is like everybody's bureaucratic machine and legislative machine that everybody's holding on to, mainly because the roots of it comes from somewhere else. So we actually practice it like a religion. We don't really question, why do we actually conserve buildings? Why do we really, why heritage matters really? We just have to do it, otherwise we are not civilized. So we do it and we continue doing it while everywhere else people are moving on. So I think also the question, when we are talking about the role of advisory bodies and the way the state parties play a role, I think we need to accept also that you need to have a different role in different countries and different political systems and different cultural contexts.
Thank you so much, Hussam. I think this conversation can take as long as we want, but I'm afraid that everybody is tired and we have a limit of 2 hours. Before I ask Egi, our partner in organizing the general idea of this session, I would like to raise a question by Albino Giopella. Well, the question is interesting. Are the key actors of the World Heritage System, IG experts representing different institutions and officials, really committed and interested in giving away much of their power to communities and civil society? So are we ready to do that if we consider ourselves as experts? Or we're not ready or we're ready because we are also a civil society. So what do you think? I think Dennis might give us an answer to that.
Well, I think the answer is no.
Okay. I think this is what we've been waiting for.
No.
I agree with Dennis.
So,
We are definitely not ready for that.
Well. What I think we should be ready because we consider ourselves also civil society. We're not governmental bodies. We are civil society, so we need to give ourselves the role, but as a civil society, not as expert seeing the issues from outside. We need to go inside and dig and find out more.
I'm not
I would like
I'm not answering for me. I'm answering for everybody else.
If I may say something, I think also, the place of traditional knowledge and wisdom, it remains something of a myth really in the whole process. While we are dealing with places and phenomena that were produced by this traditional wisdom and system of power, system of communication, and organizing society, this wisdom is really, kind of like cosmetic thing that in dossiers, and in the process. And actually, if we are really, if it takes much, more central place in the process, then we will have to step aside, and the experts or the ones who really would have a say, a bit, quite a strong say, would be, from the local community, because that will be their language, their logic system, and their way of seeing the world, seeing the heritage. So I think that's Jupila's answer question touches on this issue, that it's not really about giving away power. We are knowledgeable of the system. It's a very sophisticated system, totally alien to the local community, and we are very, we know it inside out. So it will be ridiculous to give it to somebody who doesn't speak the language and hardly knows the system. But if the system really relies heavily on the traditional knowledge and wisdom and way of doing things and worldview of the local community, definitely they will have to lead, or at least be full partners.
Thank you so much. Well, Ege, the floor is yours.
Oh no, it's going to be difficult to try to distill. I mean, this is a very esteemed, distinguished panel. I'm very fortunate to be among you. Dear Luna and Deborah asked me to make a closing set of remarks, which should be short. I took a lot of notes, and I was really restraining myself to say something as a panelist. At some points, you had amazing, provocative points, actually. But the discussion was really rich. Thank you so much for that, of course. And so allow me, as the coordinator of the whole debate this month of the Our World Heritage Sustainability theme, to maybe try to connect to OWH's wider goals. And I think like we're discussing the state of the art critique, the latest issues that we're all experts. And Dennis, yes, I've been working for a long time on opening up to handing over power to communities, and it has not been easy, but I think I'm much better than 15 years ago. So it's a long process, but it happens. Anyway, as experts, we are laying down the issues, and I think we have a very great awareness of what is missing, and what are the problems of the system. And OWH was created out of such a big concern by fellow experts like us and concerned citizens in a way. And I think the strength of such alternative voices is actually to try to come up with constructive, positive alternatives. I think what we should take away from such sessions is not just kind of getting depressed or writing a few more articles on how terrible the problems are, but what can actually be done, you know? And the first question and the first intervention that I wrote to myself here is, okay, what are we going to do to change the World Heritage procedures? How are we going to tackle the operational guidelines? And these have also been mentioned during the session today. And how do the states parties operate? And Evrim has given a lot of great technical insights. You know, she's, I think, the #1 expert in this to bring Turkey to us today. So I think after laying down the importance of participation and civil society, it's probably time to develop our skills for participation, you know, and this participation strategy, getting support from experts in participation. Like, I really love this stakeholder IAP2. Have you ever heard of the International Association for Public Participation? They can help us, for example. I've seen them in some conferences, and it's exciting to go out of our heritage field and talk to other expertises and to, you know, get new ideas from them. And I think this will bring us to what Dennis was saying about, we are all civil society, or we are all in this together, you know, and this kind of us and them thing happens a lot. We're doing it all the time. And then I think we're trying to come back to being a bit more constructive and rational, maybe, and maybe trying to be self-critical as well. And we can be civil society. People change hats. We know something, others know something. It's not that we have to transfer power completely. We share it, right? And I think we kind of take the best optimal role in the whole ecosystem that we all share as stakeholders. And you know, you have to tackle it from the big picture and develop a general culture of participation. Like, this can be more democratic societies, voting, better instruments, how to empower local communities, how to do better legislation. In countries like Turkey, legislation is more important than maybe in countries like the UK, where it's more, you know, devolved and more kind of guidance rather than prescriptive. So it varies. And then how to localize it, like Hossam said, make it have more sense for the people who are actually living with them. So we're all part of this ecosystem. And I think we cannot give up on World Heritage. We love it too much, actually. I know how excited we get when something is inscribed sometimes. Not everybody feels the same about every site inscription, of course, but there is this interest in the world about World Heritage. So we're not giving up on it by dismissing the problematic nature of it. We're trying to improve it, you know. So I think we have to hold it by the two horns and really try to improve it by being very communicative, looking for dialogue, not demonizing or alienating any stakeholders, but looking at how we can help. I think that's what OWH is also trying to do. And we're really feeding off from all these very rich comments from experts and fellow colleagues like you. And it's really been, again, so enriching. And I'm very thankful. I think I've already spoken enough. Any final notes? Well, maybe one more thing. There's this word identity that has become identities. Maybe you heard of the plurality. And we're talking about authority today a lot, and legitimacy. And I find that we all have some authority and agency, and authority should be maybe used in the plural. Authorities, we have expert authority, social community authority, financial public authority, and they all have to come together to work in more positive symbiotic relations, I think. So please try to make time for our final session tomorrow. We have more concluding remarks, and please try to look at Our World Heritage Voices, that the link has been shared in the chat box. And before I tune out, if anybody wants to add anything to what I said, we have a few seconds. Luna, Deborah? I went on a rant. Now I feel I have to stop and listen to you.
I added my thank you on the chat. You know, my tremendous gratitude to everybody who participated. It's an absolute honor and joy to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like just to conclude with the word of Ernesto Cirolli. Well, he's a great guy that he said when you want to help someone, just shut up and listen. So I think this is something that we really need to do with our local communities when we really want to help them, and we want to proceed with the, sorry for the word shut up, but this is what he said. So I think we need to move on, and this is a very important issue because we think that we are doing what is best for these local communities without asking them. I think we need to start let them make their future and what is best for their future. On behalf of our World Heritage Team Sustainability, I would like to thank Dennis Rodwell, Evrim Ulusan, Alessandra Cummins, Hussam Mahdi. I would like to thank Egi Yildirim and my dear colleague Deborah Barros for this organization and discussion. I would like not to forget our dearest Lucia from FLACAM and our partner in our OWH. And I think this discussion needs to be deeper, and we can go furthermore in our next session. Thank you so much, and let's hope that we will have more and more discussion about it. Thank you all, and wish you all the best day. Assalamu alaikum means peace be upon you all and all the time. Thank you, Lucia. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Good job. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Thanks all.